Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to section number 2. This is where we will be practicing writing an advantages and disadvantages essay. Okay, and there will be 2 of these types of essays in this course. The next one is in section 6. Okay, so I just want to recap what I've already said in the previous video in case you didn't watch all of it. It's just that I would like you to notice that the first thing that you'll be doing on every section is this testing yourself section here. And this is where you will be doing an essay without any input from me or anybody else. And the point of that is that you're able to see what you can produce at the beginning of the section, and then you will redo a very similar essay down below here and compare it to what you produced over here. In, for example, in this one, in section 2, it's lecture number 4. You'll be comparing it with what you do in lecture number 10. Okay, and the reason for that is to keep your motivation levels high, to show that you're making progress over the course of each section. Okay. Also, in each section, there's a model answer for the same question that comes up, and you'll be doing some analysis. Let's actually have a look at what it looks like. So here, for example, you will have the model answer, as a PDF over here, and then you'll be doing tasks. Here, in this case, 6 tasks where you will be really analyzing the model answer and getting to really to understand it. Okay, but what we're mostly focusing on in this video is these things here. Okay, we'll be looking at the introduction and the conclusion to an essay and how to write an introduction. We'll be looking at some topic sentences. We'll be looking at hedging. We'll be looking also at things called discourse markers. And in fact, let's just go straight onto it and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So let's start over here. Okay, so as I said already, we'll be looking at introductions and conclusions, something called discourse markers, something called verb patterns, topic sentences, and something called hedging. Okay, so let's start with the introductions. In this one here, what's most important about introductions is that the first impression is very important. Unlike the IELTS listening and reading exams, the speaking and the writing are checked by humans. So there is an element of something called subjectivity. Okay, it's very difficult for a human to be completely objective, to be unbiased, and so I just want to look at some very quick tips that will help you to improve your first impression for your writing. The first thing is to make sure that your introduction is powerful and conforms to the standards of a formal essay. This obviously talking about task 2 here. So the formal essay, if it doesn't conform to those standard formats, the examiner is going to have a bad first impression, and as you know, first impressions count, don't they? Another thing is talking about your conclusion here. Remember that 5 or 6 or 7 seconds before your mark is given, the last thing the examiner is going to see is the conclusion, the final paragraph of your essay. If that is not particularly good, what do you think is going to happen to your grade? So my point is that even if your essay is beautifully written, if your introduction is not as good as it could be, or if your conclusion isn't as good as it could be, everything in between, the meat of the sandwich, for example, or the cheese of the sandwich, might not be, let's say, viewed as positively as if you'd actually done the introduction and the conclusion properly. And so we'll be looking, in this course, we'll be looking, or in this section, we'll be looking at how to write a good introduction for a advantages and disadvantages essay, as well as how to write good conclusions for all essays in general. Over here you can have a look at some examples of ways we can say in conclusion instead of using the same thing. So we've got to sum up, to summarize, sorry, in summary. To summarize is not here, but that could be one of them. Okay. Now, one very important thing is the difference between the top one and the bottom one here. This looks like a doctor's writing. Maybe it is a doctor. And this person may be highly intelligent, perfect grammar, perfect vocabulary, beautifully written, and yet as an examiner, as I was an ex-IELTS examiner, so I know this, I would look at this and go, no, this is giving me a headache, it's frustrating, it's annoying. Maybe you would have got an 8, but I'm going to give you a 7.5. No, obviously I shouldn't, but subconsciously that's what's happening in my mind when I see this. And so it's very important that you practice getting your script looking a little bit better. This is not wonderful, but it's certainly better than this one, as we can all agree, because I can read it. Okay, so if you find yourself spending a lot of time on the computer, a lot of typing, a lot of using your phone, and not much time writing, especially if your native language doesn't have a Latin script, it is absolutely essential that you give yourself a lot of practice before you do the IELTS writing exam, because you'll be, first of all, you have some pain in your hand for writing for a long time if you don't practice a lot, but also if your handwriting is as bad as what it is showing above here, you are going to suffer from a problem of subjectivity. So the idea that the examiner is not going to give you the highest grade simply because this looks like a spider's dog's breakfast rubbish. Okay. All right. So first impressions, very important. And in the conclusion, last impressions are also very important, because that's just before the mark is awarded. That's the thing that they'll be reading. Okay. Right. Let's move on. Okay. The next thing we're going to look at is something called discourse markers. Now, the way I like to think of discourse markers, I think of them as sort of signs on a road. This mountain here is an idea. And the person on the road, the person in the car, is the reader. In this case, it's the examiner. And the examiner needs to, maybe he doesn't have any lights on in his car, it's night time. And the examiner needs to be able to travel along the road without crashing. Okay, and that, if you visualize it like that, this is what discourse markers do. They help the examiner or the reader to know, okay, slow down, this is important, only 40 miles an hour, not 120. Watch out, we're turning left here, we're not going straight anymore because I want to talk about this a little bit more. And this is all with discourse markers. Okay, so they basically help the examiner, the reader, to navigate your text. So it's absolutely important that you use them. You cannot avoid not using them. So discourse markers are used, sorry, that should be markers. Oops. Okay. Let me just write that, markers. So some discourse markers are used in formal writing, some in informal speech. So let's do this one first. This is informal. You might see this in your IELTS speaking, or not so much this one, because this is more for a presentation, but you might hear somebody say this, okay, so I'm just going to talk to you quickly about such and such a thing. And you would find this in spoken English with gonna instead of going to, but it's a type of discourse marker. It functions the same way as this one here, really. In this essay, I will be exploring the pros and cons of. Both of them do the same thing, basically. Obviously, this one is in spoken English, and this one in written. And can you work out what they do? Essentially, what they're doing is they're saying to the listener, in this case, or the reader, in this case, that be prepared to hear the general overview of what I'm going to write about, or what I'm going to talk about. So it's a sort of signal, or as I said here, It's a sort of sign to say, okay, be prepared to listen for the overall message of my, in this case, essay, or in this case, presentation or talk. Okay, and you just have to learn these discourse markers like you would new vocabulary. Okay, this is something called a chunk, C-H-U-N-K. This is a chunk of language, and discourse markers are sometimes only one word. For example, the word however or nevertheless. This is a type of discourse marker. You've been turning left, for example, and then when you hear the word however, you know that they're going to actually be turning right now because we'll be going this way, and however is a contrasting discourse marker. Okay, but often the discourse markers are in chunks, large numbers of words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 words make up this particular chunk. Okay, and you just need to remember these things. So think of it as a single piece of vocabulary. In this essay, I will be, instead of exploring, I could probably say examining or looking at or giving details about. Okay, but it must be with ing. And then the pros and cons, the advantages and disadvantages, the positives and negatives. So you can change the chunk every now and then a little bit, certain words, but for the most part, the frame or the scaffolding of the chunk remains the same. Always this ing, and we keep these words together. Okay, so as I said, please try and remember these discourse markers as single pieces of vocabulary. Okay, and we'll be looking at these in detail, but these discourse markers also come up all over the place. So when you're reading more academic English, or even not academic, they come up in other not so formal texts. Look out for them. When you see them, note them down, write them down. They'll become very useful for you in your own writing. Okay, let's move on to something called topic sentences. Okay, now topic sentences, basically what they do is they introduce your ideas. Okay, and each paragraph starts with a topic sentence, and then everything in that paragraph hangs from the topic sentence. So there's your topic sentence over here, and then all your ideas from that are like a coat that hang from that one idea. So it's absolutely important that you have something to hold all your ideas up. If you don't have a good, strong, solid hook, your shirt or your coat is going to land on the floor and it's not going to be a very successful paragraph. So let's take this one as an example. One of the main advantages of having a car is, and then I finish this, that's just the first half of the topic sentence. But if I could, let's finish it. Let's say one of the main advantages of having a car is being able to, sorry, I'm just going to change this color. Being able to travel anywhere at any time. Okay, that's your hook, right? And then from then on, you might be giving examples, you might be explaining why you believe this is the case, etc., etc., and you'll be expanding on the single idea that has been introduced by this sentence. One of the main advantages is being able to travel anywhere at any time. Okay, and in this lecture, in this section, sorry, we'll be looking at a lot of information about how to produce topic sentences and how to expand on them as well. Okay, right, let's have a look at the next thing then, and that is something called verb patterns. And these are patterns that look like this. There's 4 options. This one is not so common. So let's focus on these 3. They are usually the verb plus the ing form of a verb. So verb patterns in this case means 2 verbs together. Together. I don't know if you can read that. So verb plus ing, or verb plus the to infinitive, to provide, to find, to study. And then a verb plus object, like object being them, or people, or students, or me, or us. and then the to infinitive. So similar to this one, except there's an object in it. And then this one with the bare infinitive, as in there's no to here, just the call, offer, take. Okay. And as I said, these three columns are the most common structures that you will find in English, and occasionally you'll find these ones, especially with these two words, suggest and recommend. Okay. But there are no hard and fast rules. Hard and fast, there's no set rules for these. You just have to remember these verb patterns. So I can't say to you that every time a verb ends in ing, you need to look out for the, sorry, not ing, ine. You need to look out for, you need to put an ing form of the verb. That's just not the way English works, unfortunately. English is a Creole language. It's a mixture of languages from Latin and French to a bit of Greek and Germanic languages all mixed in. So the rules that you might have in your own language, especially if it's a Romance language, are not going to apply in English, unfortunately. So you just have to remember them. And then when you see them, like this, two of these verbs together, note them down. Okay, so start noticing and note them down. Now, my vocabulary course is already out. I'm working on my mastering grammar. As soon as I've finished this course, it will be out. And that is where I'll be looking at a lot more detail of these verb patterns, because if I spent a lot of time on just verb patterns, then there wouldn't be much writing going on. So that's more, these verb patterns are more likely to be found in vocabulary, the IELTS Step-by-Step Mastering Vocabulary, or IELTS Step-by-Step Mastering Grammar for that's coming up soon. Okay, so we won't be spending much time on this, but I want you to start noticing them as you see them in things that you read. And that is the final thing, hedging. Okay. Before I talk about hedging, let's just have a look at an example. It's going to be easier. So students do not come to lectures if they are early in the morning. They, in this case, means the lectures. Okay. So students do not come to lectures if the lectures are early in the morning. Now, another way to write this with a similar meaning, but there's a major difference. Many students tend not to attend early morning lectures. Okay. The second example is using something called hedging. Many, and the phrase here, tend not to. Okay. What they're doing is they're saying that it's not black and white. These hedges allow this statement, which is too black and white and too general, to have a gray area, if you know what I mean. So imagine I said students do not come to lectures if the lectures are early on in the morning, and there's 5 people in the lecture hall at 7:30 going, excuse me, you said all students. When I say students, I mean all students. And those 5 will say, excuse me, but that's not true because I'm here. So I need, as somebody who's writing academically, I need to hedge my words. So many students, 85% of students, tend not to, usually don't. Similar meaning. So 85% of students usually don't attend early morning lectures. Okay, that's the type of, I'm giving specific numbers here because maybe I've done some research, but we probably wouldn't say that. We would just say many. Okay, and that's the type of hedge. And the reason is we don't like to generalize. We don't like black and white. We like this area in between, as in academic writing, because that gives us some leeway to move to the left or move to the right and say this is possible, but if you know what I mean. Okay. Successful hedging makes your writing sound more academic, and we've got lots of practice activities about hedging in this course. The introduction to hedging comes up in this section, and then in section 6 with another example of advantages and disadvantages essay, we'll be looking at more advanced hedging. Okay, and you can see some examples of them here, of the more advanced stuff that we'll be looking at in section 6 of this course. Okay, so move on now to the testing yourself section, and then look at the model answer analysis and then go through slowly all those things that I've just spoken about in more detail, and then finally compare your essays. So hopefully this section will help you greatly. This advantages and disadvantages essay, this type of essay is extremely common in the IELTS exam, which is the reason why it's the one that I start with in this course. Okay, and let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, get started, enjoy yourself, and I'll see you in section 3.